The morning sun peeked through the tall glass windows of the airport terminal as James Whitfield checked his expensive watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Everything in his life ran on schedule, and today was no different. His private jet was undergoing maintenance, forcing him to fly commercial, an inconvenience he rarely had to face. "Daddy, look at the big planes." 4-year-old Tyler pressed his small hands against the glass, his eyes wide with wonder at the massive aircraft moving across the tarmac. James nodded without looking up from his phone. "Yes, very nice. Don't touch the glass, please. Fingerprints." His voice was kind but distracted as he scrolled through urgent emails. His tech company was closing a major deal today, and even though he was taking Tyler to visit his grandparents, work never stopped. A flight attendant approached them with a warm smile. "Mr. Whitfield, we're ready to begin pre-boarding for first-class passengers." James slipped his phone into the pocket of his tailored suit jacket and took Tyler's hand. "That's us, buddy. Remember what we talked about? You're going to be a good boy on the plane, right?" Tyler nodded eagerly, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, a limited edition toy that cost more than what some people earned in a week. "I promise, Daddy." They walked past the long line of waiting passengers, some of whom glanced at them with a mixture of recognition and envy. James had been featured in business magazines, and his face was becoming increasingly recognizable, especially after his company went public last year. In the back of the regular boarding line stood a woman and her 10-year-old son. The woman checked her boarding passes nervously, her fingers slightly worn from years of hard work. Her son, Andre, stood quietly beside her, taking in the busy airport scene with observant eyes. "Mom, are you sure Grandma will recognize me?" "It's been 3 years," Andre asked, adjusting the straps of his worn backpack. Lisa Thomas smiled down at her son, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Of course she will. You might have grown taller, but you still have the same kind eyes." She ruffled his hair affectionately. "I'm sorry it took us so long to visit her again." Andre shrugged, understanding in his young face. "It's okay, I know you had to work a lot." The truth was that it had taken Lisa 3 years to save enough for these plane tickets. As a single mother working 2 jobs, luxuries like air travel were rare. But her mother's health was declining and this visit couldn't be postponed any longer. Final boarding call for Flight 372 to Los Angeles, the announcement blared over the speakers. Lisa gripped their boarding passes tighter. "That's us, come on." They hurried to the gate where the attendant gave them a slightly impatient look. "Just in time. You'll need to check that bag, ma'am. We've run out of overhead space." Lisa's face fell. "But all our things are in here." Andre touched his mother's arm. "It's okay, Mom, I'll keep my backpack with me, it has my game in it." The game console was Andre's most prized possession, a birthday gift his mother had worked overtime for months to afford. It wasn't the newest model, but to Andre, it was everything. The flight attendant's expression softened. "The small backpack can stay with you, young man." They made their way down the jet bridge, the last passengers to board the crowded plane. As they moved through first class, Andre couldn't help but notice the spacious seats and the passengers already sipping drinks in large, comfortable chairs. He spotted Tyler, the little boy with the dinosaur toy, sitting by the window while his father organized their space with practiced efficiency. Tyler waved at Andre, who smiled, and waved back before continuing to their seats several rows behind in economy. Their seats were in the middle row, cramped between a businessman typing furiously on his laptop and a college student with headphones. Lisa helped Andre buckle his seatbelt before securing her own. "Are you excited about the flight?" she whispered to Andre, trying to mask her own nervousness. This was only the second time she had ever flown. Andre nodded, his eyes bright with anticipation. "I can't wait to see what the clouds look like from up close." Meanwhile, in first class, James was arranging Tyler's toys and tablets to keep him occupied during the 5-hour flight. The flight attendant stopped by with a warm towel and a menu. "And why? I get you anything to drink before takeoff, Mr. Whitfield?" James ordered sparkling water for himself and apple juice for Tyler, who was bouncing slightly in his seat with excitement. "First time flying?" An older businessman across the aisle smiled at Tyler. James shook his head. "No, He usually flies on our private jet. This is his first time on a commercial airliner. The man raised his eyebrows, suitably impressed, and returned to his newspaper. James didn't mean to sound boastful. It was simply his reality. After building his tech empire from nothing, he had become accustomed to certain luxuries. He had worked hard for everything he had, putting in 18-hour days for years before his big break. Now, at 38, he was worth millions, with investments spanning multiple industries. The plane began to move, and Tyler squealed with delight. "We're going, Daddy. We're going," James smiled, putting his phone away as instructed for takeoff. He rarely had uninterrupted time with Tyler. Between business trips and late nights at the office, James relied heavily on Tyler's nanny, Ms. Chen, for day-to-day parenting. This trip was partly an attempt to connect more with his son after his wife, Catherine, had pointed out how little time he spent with Tyler. "Look out the window, Tyler. See how small everything gets?" James pointed as the plane lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them. Tyler pressed his face against the window, his dinosaur clutched tightly to his chest. "The cars look like toys." Several rows behind, Andre was having a similar reaction. "Mom, look, everything's so tiny," he whispered excitedly, not wanting to disturb the other passengers. Lisa leaned over to peek out the small window, her hand squeezing Andre's. Despite her worry about her mother's health and the cost of this trip, she couldn't help but smile at her son's joy. "Pretty amazing, isn't it?" she said. "When I was your age, I never thought I'd fly in a plane." Andre looked at her curiously. "Really? Never?" Lisa shook her head. "Your grandma didn't have much money. We took the bus everywhere." She didn't add that until recently she hadn't been in much better financial shape herself. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off. The flight attendants began their service, starting with first class. James accepted a warm cookie for Tyler, who was now coloring in a leather-bound sketchbook with expensive art pencils. "Would you like to watch a movie?" James asked, pulling out a tablet. Tyler shook his head. "Can you read me a story instead?" James hesitated. He had planned to use the flight time to review some documents, but the hopeful look in Tyler's eyes made him reconsider. "Sure, buddy. Which one?" Tyler pulled out a picture book about dinosaurs from his backpack, and James began to read, doing his best to create different voices for each character. Tyler giggled, snuggling closer to his father. In economy class, the service cart was making its slow progress down the narrow aisle. Andre carefully counted the money his mother had given him for the trip. $15, which felt like a fortune to him. "You can get a snack if you're hungry," Lisa told him, though she herself declined anything when the cart reached them. The prices were much higher than she had expected. Andre ordered a small bag of chips and a soda, carefully counting out the dollars and change. The flight attendant smiled at his politeness. "Thank you," Andre said, accepting his treats. He immediately offered half his chips to his mother. "You eat them," she insisted. "I'm not hungry." But Andre knew better. He had seen her skip meals before to make sure he had enough. He placed a few chips in her hand anyway. "Please, Mom, it's more fun to share." Lisa's eyes softened, and she accepted the chips with a smile. The first hour of the flight passed peacefully. James read 3 books to Tyler before finally pulling out his phone to check his emails. Tyler was content drawing pictures of the clouds and dinosaurs, occasionally asking his father questions about how planes fly or how high up they were. Andre had taken out his game console and was playing with the sound turned all the way down, so as not to disturb anyone. Lisa had fallen asleep beside him, her head resting awkwardly against the seat. He noticed her neck would be sore when she woke, so he gently adjusted her position and placed his rolled-up sweatshirt between her head and the seat. Outside, the sky was a brilliant blue with fluffy white clouds floating below them like a sea of cotton. Both Tyler and Andre, from their different sections of the plane, marveled at the view. 2 boys from vastly different worlds, sharing the same sky. Little did they know that their worlds were about to collide in a way that would change both of their lives forever. The plane hit the first patch of turbulence about 90 minutes into the flight. The aircraft shuddered and dipped suddenly, causing drinks to slosh and passengers to grip their armrests. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring. "Folks, we're experiencing some light turbulence. Nothing to worry about, but I'm turning on the seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats if you're up and about." In first class, Tyler's eyes widened with fear at the unfamiliar sensation. His dinosaur toy slipped from his hands and fell to the floor. James, who had been responding to an urgent email, reached down to retrieve it. "It's okay, buddy, just a little bumpy air," James said, handing the stuffed animal back to his son. Tyler clutched the dinosaur tightly. "I don't like it, Daddy." His lower lip trembled slightly. "It'll be over soon," James assured him, returning to his phone. The company's stock had dropped 2 points after a competitor announced a new product line and his team needed direction. The plane jolted again, harder this time. A flight attendant stumbled slightly before catching herself on a seat back. Tyler let out a frightened whimper that quickly grew into a wail. "Daddy, make it stop," he cried, tears streaming down his face. James put his phone away and tried to comfort his son. "Hey, it's okay, look, see, I'm not scared." He pointed out how the flight attendants were still smiling and moving around. "If they're not worried, we don't need to be either." But his words had no effect. Tyler's cries grew louder, drawing glances from nearby passengers. "Shh, Tyler, please," James whispered, feeling the weight of judgmental eyes. "Remember, big boys don't cry over little bumps." This only made Tyler cry harder. James felt a flash of frustration, immediately followed by guilt. He wasn't good at this. Catherine would have known exactly what to say or do. He always seemed to make things worse. In economy class, the turbulence felt even more pronounced. Lisa had woken up with a start at the first bump. She immediately reached for Andre's hand. "Just some bumpy air," Andre said, repeating what he'd heard a flight attendant tell another nervous passenger. "The plane is built to handle it." Lisa smiled at her son's bravery, though her own knuckles were white from gripping the armrest. "When did you become so smart about planes?" Andre shrugged. "I read a book about them at the library last month." The turbulence subsided after a few minutes, but up in first class, Tyler's crying didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. James tried everything he could think of. Toys, games on the tablet, promises of ice cream when they landed, but nothing worked. "What's wrong, buddy? Tell me what's bothering you," James pleaded quietly, conscious of the irritated sighs from neighboring passengers. Tyler could only sob harder, his words coming out in hiccuping bursts. "I want Mommy and Ms. Chen." James felt a pang of hurt, though he knew it wasn't fair. Of course Tyler would want his mother and his nanny. They were the ones who comforted him when he was upset, who knew his routines and preferences. James was practically a stranger to his son's daily life. "Mommy's on her business trip, remember? And we're going to have fun at Grandma and Grandpa's house," James said, trying to sound cheerful despite the sinking feeling in his chest. A flight attendant approached with a concerned smile. "Is everything okay? Can I get him some juice or maybe a coloring book?" James nodded gratefully. "Yes, please. Anything that might help." She returned quickly with apple juice in a plastic cup with a lid and straw, along with a coloring book featuring cartoon airplanes. "Here you go, sweetie. Would you like to color a picture for your daddy?" Tyler turned away, burying his face in James's expensive suit jacket, leaving tear stains and snot on the fine material. James didn't even notice the damage to his clothing, too concerned with his son's distress. "He's not usually like this," James explained, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "He's normally such a happy kid." The flight attendant nodded sympathetically. "Children sometimes react differently to flying. The pressure changes can hurt their ears, or the confined space can make them anxious." As she walked away, Tyler's cries grew even louder, now punctuated with screams. James felt helpless and increasingly desperate. He had built a tech empire from nothing, managed thousands of employees and negotiated billion-dollar deals, yet he couldn't comfort his own 4-year-old son. The businessman across the aisle, who had seemed impressed earlier, now wore a look of clear annoyance. "Can't you control your child?" he muttered, just loud enough for James to hear. James felt his face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, Before he could respond, an elderly woman in front of them turned around. "Young man," she addressed. The businessman, not James. "Children aren't machines you can simply switch off. Have some compassion." She then smiled kindly at James. "My grandson went through a phase like this. It will pass." James nodded gratefully, though her words provided little practical help as Tyler continued to wail. "Sir," another flight attendant approached, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm going to need to ask you to try to quiet your son. His crying is disturbing the other passengers." "What do you think I'm trying to do?" James snapped, immediately regretting his tone. "I'm sorry, I'm doing my best." The flight attendant's expression softened. "I understand. Sometimes walking up and down the aisle can help. The movement might soothe him." James stood up, lifting Tyler into his arms. "Let's try that, buddy. Let's go for a little walk." They began slowly pacing the first-class aisle, but Tyler's screams only seemed to intensify. Passengers either stared openly or deliberately looked away, both reactions making James feel worse. After 3 increasingly uncomfortable loops of the first-class cabin, the head flight attendant suggested they try walking further back into the main cabin. "Sometimes the white noise is louder back there, which can be calming for some children," she explained. Desperate for any solution, James carried his howling son through the curtain that separated first class from economy. The contrast was immediate. Narrower seats, less legroom, and many more people packed closely together. Some passengers looked up at the sound of Tyler's cries, while others kept their eyes fixed on books or screens, trying to create their own bubble of peace. As they walked down the aisle, James noticed how different the experience was back here. Flight attendants moved more quickly, serving more people with fewer amenities. Passengers sat shoulder to shoulder, some looking uncomfortable in the confined space. He rarely ventured into economy class, and the reminder of his privilege made him feel suddenly self-conscious. Tyler's screams had now been going on for nearly 45 minutes without pause. His little face was red and swollen from crying, and his voice was becoming hoarse. James had never felt more inadequate in his life. "Have you tried checking if his ears hurt?" a woman suggested as they passed. "My little one used to scream like that when the pressure bothered her ears." James had already tried that, but he nodded politely anyway. "Thank you." Near the back of the plane, Lisa watched the well-dressed man carry his screaming child up and down the aisle. She felt a pang of sympathy. She'd been in similar situations when Andre was younger. "That poor little boy," she murmured. "And his dad looks completely overwhelmed." Andre looked up from his game and watched the pair pass by again. The little boy's cries were piercing, and some passengers were now covering their ears or casting annoyed glances at the father and son. "Maybe he's scared," Andre suggested, his eyes following the distressed child. There was no judgment in his voice, only concern. James was at his wits' end. Tyler's face was pressed against his shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. Nothing was working. Not walking, not talking, not bribing. He had even tried calling Catherine, forgetting in his desperation that she would be in meetings all day and wouldn't answer. As they passed Andre and Lisa's row for the 3rd time, Andre made a decision. He tucked his game console safely into his backpack and unbuckled his seatbelt. "Andre, what are you doing?" Lisa asked, surprised. "I want to try to help," Andre said simply. "Remember how you used to help me when I got scared?" Before Lisa could respond, Andre had stepped into the aisle, directly in front of James and the crying Tyler. James nearly collided with him, stopping just in time. "Excuse me, sir," Andre said politely, having to speak up to be heard over Tyler's wails. "I think I might be able to help." James looked down at the boy standing before him, a child not much older than 10, wearing simple clothes that had seen better days. Under normal circumstances, James might have brushed past him with a polite smile. But these weren't normal circumstances, and James was desperate enough to try anything. "How?" he asked simply, adjusting his grip on Tyler, who continued to sob against his shoulder. Andre gestured to a nearby empty seat where an airline pillow had been left behind. "Maybe we could sit there for a minute?" I think he might be scared because he doesn't understand what's happening. James hesitated, then nodded. He had tried everything else. What did he have to lose? The flight attendant who had been watching? The interaction nodded her approval, grateful that someone might be able to help the distressed child. As James sat down with Tyler still clinging to him, Andre took a deep breath. He wasn't sure if his idea would work, but he remembered how frightened he had felt during his first flight, and how his mother had known exactly what to say to make him feel better. What happened next would astonish everyone on board, including James himself, and forge an unexpected connection that crossed the invisible barriers of social class and privilege that had, until now, kept these two families' worlds apart. Andre stood quietly beside the seat where James had settled with the still sobbing Tyler. For a moment, he simply watched the little boy, his eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed beyond his years. "Hi there," Andre said softly, crouching down to get on eye level with Tyler. "My name is Andre. What's yours?" Tyler's sobs paused for just a second, just long enough to hiccup, "T. Tyler," before burying his face back against his father's chest. James looked at Andre with a mixture of despair, and skepticism. What could this child possibly do that he hadn't already tried? Still, there was something in the boy's calm demeanor that made James willing to let him try. "He's been crying for nearly an hour," James explained, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I've tried everything." Andre nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it's not about trying everything. Sometimes it's about trying the right thing." He turned his attention back to Tyler. "Hey Tyler, is this your first time on a big plane?" Tyler peeked out from his father's suit jacket with one eye, his breath still coming in shuddering gasps. He gave a tiny nod. "Mine too," Andre said, though this wasn't entirely true. He had flown once before, but he sensed that what Tyler needed now was connection, not facts. "It's pretty scary, huh? All these strange noises and feelings." Another small nod from Tyler. "You know what?" Andre continued, his voice gentle and conversational. "I was scared too. The first time the plane started moving, my stomach felt all funny, like when you go down a big slide too fast." Tyler's crying had quieted to sniffles as he listened to Andre. James watched in amazement as his son's attention shifted from his distress to the older boy's words. "Can I show you something that helped me?" Andre asked, reaching for his worn backpack that Lisa had passed to him. Tyler hesitated, then nodded, curiosity temporarily overcoming his distress. Andre carefully unzipped his backpack and pulled out his prized possession, a handheld game console that had clearly been well loved. It wasn't the latest model. In fact, it was several generations old, with a few minor scratches on its surface. But Andre handled it as though it were made of gold. "This is my special game," Andre explained. "Whenever I feel scared or sad, I play it and it helps me feel better. Would you like to see it?" Tyler's eyes widened with interest, and he straightened up slightly in his father's lap. James felt a surge of hope as his son's tears began to slow. "What kind of game is it?" Tyler asked in a small hiccuping voice. Andre smiled, turning on the device. "It's a game about building things. You get to make your own world with houses and animals and everything, see?" He tilted the screen so Tyler could see the colorful display. Tyler leaned forward, his dinosaur toy still clutched tightly in one hand. "Can you build dinosaurs too?" "Sure can." Andre nodded enthusiastically. "You can build anything you can imagine. Dinosaurs, castles, spaceships, anything." A flight attendant passing by paused to watch the interaction, a smile spreading across her face as she noticed Tyler's tears had stopped. She caught James's eye and gave him an encouraging nod before continuing down the aisle. "Would you like to try?" Andre asked, offering the console to Tyler. "I can show you how it works." Tyler looked up at his father, seeking permission. James nodded, relief washing over him as he realized his son had stopped crying completely. "Yes, please," Tyler said, his voice still shaky but more controlled. Andre pulled a small package of sanitizing wipes from his backpack. "My mom always says we should clean things before sharing them," he explained, carefully wiping down the console before handing it to Tyler. That way we don't share germs. James was struck by this thoughtful gesture. It was the kind of thing Catherine would have done, a small act that showed consideration for others. Lisa had been watching from her seat, ready to intervene if needed. But seeing how naturally Andre was handling the situation, she remained where she was, her heart swelling with pride. Her son had always been sensitive to others' feelings, always quick to offer comfort where he could. As Tyler took the game console in his small hands, Andre patiently explained how to use it. See this button? That makes your character jump. And this one lets you build things. Tyler's face lit up with excitement as he pressed a button and watched a block appear on the screen. Look, Daddy, I made a block. That's great, buddy, James said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Andre with undisguised gratitude. Thank you. Andre shrugged, a modest smile on his face. It's okay. Everyone gets scared sometimes. Nearby passenger who had been visibly annoyed by Tyler's crying earlier now watched the scene with a softened expression. Several others had also turned to observe, some smiling at the touching interaction between the two boys. Where did you learn to be so good with younger kids? James asked Andre, genuinely curious. I help out at my mom's work sometimes, Andre explained. She works at a daycare center after her morning job at the grocery store. I go there after school and play with the little kids while she finishes her shift. James glanced over at Lisa, who was watching them with a mixture of pride and slight embarrassment at being the center of attention. He nodded to her in acknowledgement and thanks. You've done an amazing job raising him, James said when she approached a few minutes later. Lisa's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. He's always had a big heart. Even when we didn't have much, he was always willing to share whatever he had. As the adults spoke quietly, the two boys became absorbed in the game. Tyler was now sitting beside Andre in the empty seat, both of them hunched over the console, with Tyler occasionally letting out delighted giggles as Andre showed him how to build more complex structures. I'm making a house for my dinosaur, Tyler announced, his earlier distress completely forgotten. That's perfect, Andre encouraged. Every dinosaur needs a good home. James watched this interaction with a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly that Tyler had calmed down, but also something deeper, a kind of wistful realization that despite all his wealth and success, he had somehow missed learning how to connect with his own son the way this boy had done so effortlessly. The UI flight attendant who had been concerned earlier stopped by with a tray. I thought you gentlemen might like some refreshments, she said, setting down juice boxes for both boys and coffee for James and Lisa. Thank you, Andre said politely, helping Tyler open his juice box before taking his own. You're quite the little hero, the flight attendant told Andre with a warm smile. You've made everyone's flight much more pleasant. Andre ducked his head, slightly embarrassed by the praise. I just wanted to help. As the boys continued to play, James turned to Lisa. I don't mean to pry, but Andre mentioned you work too. Jobs? Lisa nodded, a flicker of pride mixed with weariness crossing her face. The daycare job is newer. I'm trying to save up to go back to school. I always wanted to be a teacher, but life had other plans. James nodded thoughtfully. Life has a way of doing that. And you? Lisa asked. What do you do? James hesitated. He was used to people recognizing him or at least reacting to his obvious wealth. But Lisa's question was genuine, without any hint of judgment or agenda. I run a tech company, he said, simply deciding to leave out the details of its size or his personal fortune. That sounds interesting, Lisa replied. Andre loves technology. He checks out books from the library about coding, but we haven't been able to afford a computer at home yet. James watched as Andre patiently showed Tyler how to add windows to the dinosaur house they were building in the game. The older boy's kindness and generosity were all the more remarkable given that he had so little himself. We're going to visit my mother, Lisa continued, her expression growing more serious. She's been sick and the doctors... She trailed off, not wanting to say the difficult words in front of Andre, though her meaning was clear. I'm very sorry. To hear that, James said sincerely. Lisa nodded, swallowing hard. We've been saving for this trip for a long time. Andre's been so strong through everything. He even sold some of his toys to help with the plane tickets, though he doesn't know I know about that. James felt a lump form in his throat. Here was this boy who had so little, who had sold his own possessions to help his family, and yet he didn't hesitate to share his most prized possession with a crying stranger. A sudden patch of turbulence shook the plane, causing the drinks to slosh in their cups. James tensed, expecting Tyler to start crying again, but to his surprise, his son barely seemed to notice. "It's just the plane dancing through the clouds," Andre explained to Tyler, clearly repeating something someone had once told him. "Nothing to worry about." Tyler giggled at the idea. Dancing clouds. Several passengers who had been watching this transformation exchanged smiles and whispers. The mood in the cabin had shifted dramatically, from tense annoyance to a kind of collective warmth. A businessman who had earlier complained loudly about the crying now looked somewhat ashamed as he watched the boys play together. An elderly couple nearby were openly dabbing at their eyes, moved by the simple kindness they were witnessing. As James observed all of this, something shifted inside him as well. He had spent years building wealth and success, believing he was creating a better life for Tyler. But in this moment, watching his son learn compassion and resilience from a boy who had none of the material advantages Tyler took for granted, James began to question what better really meant. The plane continued, its journey across the sky, carrying all these people with their different lives and circumstances. But for a brief time, in this metal tube hurtling through the clouds, those differences seemed to matter less than the simple human connection that had formed between two boys from vastly different worlds. And as the seatbelt sign dinged off again, signaling smoother air ahead, James couldn't help but feel that something important had changed. No, just for Tyler, but for him as well. Something he couldn't quite put into words yet, but that he knew he would carry with him long after this flight had ended. For the next hour, the two boys remained huddled together over the game console, their heads nearly touching as they collaborated on their virtual world. Tyler had completely forgotten his earlier distress, now fully absorbed in the joy of creation and the warm guidance of his new friend. "Let's add a lake for the dinosaur to drink from," Andre suggested, showing Tyler how to create blue blocks in a pattern. "And fish. Dinosaurs eat fish, right?" Tyler asked, his eyes bright with excitement. Andre smiled. "Some of them did. The ones that weren't vegetarians." "What's a vegetarian?" Andre pronounced carefully. "It means they only ate plants." Tyler's face scrunched in concentration as he tried to remember the new word. "Like my Aunt Karen. She only eats plants too." Both boys giggled, and James found himself smiling as he watched them. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard Tyler laugh so freely. Lisa had returned to her seat at Andre's insistence that he was fine helping Tyler. James remained nearby, alternating between checking his emails and observing the boys' interaction. He was struck by how naturally they communicated, despite their age difference and vastly different backgrounds. The flight attendant who had been concerned earlier stopped by again. "Your son seems much happier now," she said to James with a warm smile. "That young man is quite remarkable." James nodded in agreement. "He certainly is." As he watched Andre patiently explain another game feature to Tyler, James found himself wondering about the boy's life. What kind of future awaited someone so clearly bright and compassionate, yet born into circumstances that limited his opportunities? It was a question James rarely had cause to consider in his daily life, surrounded as he was by wealth and privilege. His thoughts were interrupted when Andre glanced up at him. "Mr. Whitfield, is it okay if I show Tyler my favorite part of the Freya game? It's where you can build roller coasters." James was surprised that Andre remembered his last name. He didn't recall introducing himself formally. "Of course," he answered. "And please call me James." Tyler bounced with excitement. "Roller coasters? I love roller coasters. Daddy took me on one at Disneyland and I wasn't even scared." "That's because you're brave," Andre said with a smile, nudging the younger boy gently. "Braver than you think." James felt a pang in his chest at these words. It was true. Tyler was braver than James often gave him credit for. He had been so focused on Tyler's occasional tantrums or fears that he sometimes missed seeing his son's courage. As the boys continued to play, one of the flight attendants approached with the drink cart. "Would anyone like a refill?" she asked. "We'll be starting our meal service soon." "Juice, please," Tyler said confidently, a marked change from his earlier timidity. "May I have water, please?" Andre asked politely. The flight attendant served them both, then turned to James. "We have some coloring books and activity packs for children if they'd like those as well." James glanced at the boys, who were once again absorbed in their game. "I think they're content for now, but thank you." After the flight attendant moved on, James found himself studying Andre more closely. The boy's clothes were clean but worn, his sneakers showing signs of careful repair. Yet there was a quiet dignity in how he carried himself, a self-assurance that many adults James knew lacked. "Andre," James said, causing the boy to look up. "Thank you for helping Tyler. You're very good with younger children." Andre shrugged, modestly. "It's easy to help when you know what it feels like to be scared." He turned back to Tyler. "Want to see how to make the roller coaster go upside down?" Tyler nodded enthusiastically, and they returned to their game. James sat back, pondering Andre's words. When was the last time he had truly connected with someone else's feelings? In the business world, empathy was often seen as a weakness rather than a strength. He'd spent years training himself to focus on facts, figures, and outcomes, not emotions. Yet here was this child, instinctively understanding what Tyler needed, simply because he could imagine himself in the younger boy's position. It was a simple concept, yet somehow profound in this context. The meal service began, with first-class passengers being served first. A flight attendant brought a tray to James, who had almost forgotten he was sitting in economy now instead of his original first-class seat. "Sir, your meal is still at your seat in first class," she explained quietly. "Would you like me to bring it here?" James glanced at Tyler, still happily playing with Andre. "No, that's fine. I'll have whatever is being served here." He nodded toward the boys. "And could you bring meals for both of them as well?" The flight attendant smiled and nodded. "Of course." When the meal cart reached their row, Lisa returned to sit with them while everyone ate. The economy class meal was simple, a sandwich, chips, and a small cookie. A far cry from the gourmet options served in first class. Yet James found himself enjoying the simple fare more than he had expected. "This is yummy," Tyler declared, biting into his sandwich. "Why don't we get sandwiches on our plane, Daddy?" James smiled, amused by his son's innocent question. "Our plane is much smaller, buddy. No room for a kitchen." Andre looked at them curiously. "You have your own plane?" Before James could answer, Tyler nodded proudly. "Yep, it's super cool and has big comfy chairs that turn into beds." Andre's eyes widened slightly, but his expression remained thoughtful rather than envious. "That sounds nice," he said simply, then returned to his meal. Lisa caught James's eye over the children's heads, her expression unreadable. Was it judgment he saw there, or simply acknowledgement of the vast gulf between their circumstances? "Andre's father had a pilot's license," Lisa said after a moment, surprising both James and her son. "He used to take us up in small planes sometimes before—" She trailed off, but Andre finished for her. "Before he died. I was 4, he explained to Tyler and James matter-of-factly. He flew planes for a job." "I'm very sorry," James said, genuinely moved by this revelation. Andre nodded his acceptance of the sympathy, then changed the subject with the resilience of youth. "Tyler, do you want to see pictures of my dog? My grandma takes care of him because our apartment doesn't allow pets." As Andre pulled out a slightly worn wallet with a few cherished photos, James found himself watching Lisa instead. There was a quiet strength about her that commanded respect. A woman raising a child alone, working multiple jobs, yet somehow instilling in her son the kind of values many wealthy parents he knew failed to pass on to their children, despite all their advantages. "What are you studying?" James asked her, keeping his voice low as the boys examined Andre's photos. "Early childhood education," Lisa replied, a hint of pride in her voice. I'm taking online classes when I can afford them. It's slow going, but I'll get there eventually. James nodded, impressed by her determination. Andre mentioned you work at a daycare and a grocery store in the mornings, Lisa confirmed. The daycare lets Andre come after school, which helps with childcare. He's great with the younger kids, they all adore him. As if to illustrate her point, Tyler let out a delighted laugh at something Andre had said, leaning comfortably against the older boy as if they'd known each other for years rather than hours. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, more severe this time. The aircraft dropped suddenly, then steadied itself. Several passengers gasped and a few items fell from overhead compartments. James immediately looked at Tyler expecting fear, but was surprised to see his son relatively calm. Andre had placed a reassuring hand on the younger boy's shoulder. "Remember what I told you," Andre said to Tyler. "Just the clouds dancing. Count to 10 with me and it'll be over before we finish." Together, the boys counted slowly, and sure enough, by the time they reached 8, the turbulence had subsided. Tyler beamed triumphantly. "It worked," he exclaimed. "We made it stop." Andre didn't correct the misconception, simply smiling and giving Tyler a high five. "See? You're braver than you thought." James felt a lump form in his throat. He had tried to distract Tyler from his fears earlier, but Andre had done something different. He had acknowledged the fear, then given Tyler a way to face it. It was a subtle distinction, but a profound one. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing they would be beginning their descent in about 30 minutes. James realized with a start that they'd been sitting in economy for almost 2 hours. His first-class seat with its extra legroom and attentive service seemed far away and somehow less important than it had before. "We should probably head back to our seats for landing," Lisa said, checking her watch. Andre nodded, but Tyler's face fell instantly. "No, I want to keep playing with Andre." "Tyler," James said gently, "Andre and his mom need to get ready for landing just like we do." Tears welled up in Tyler's eyes, threatening a return of the earlier meltdown. Andre noticed immediately and intervened. "Hey, we still have a little time," he said. "And you know what? You can keep my game until we land." Both parents looked surprised at this offer. James knew how much the console meant to Andre. It was clearly his most treasured possession. "Are you sure?" James asked. Andre nodded. "It's okay. Tyler can finish building his dinosaur world and he can give it back to me when we get off the plane." "That's very generous of you," Lisa said, her eyes showing both pride and concern. "But you love that game." "I know," Andre said simply. "But Tyler needs it more right now." The depth of wisdom in this statement, from a child no older than 10, struck James profoundly. Andre understood something that many adults never grasped, that sometimes what we value most is exactly what we should be willing to share. Tyler's face lit up. "Really? I can keep playing?" "Until we land," Andre confirmed. "Just be careful with it, okay?" "I promise." Tyler clutched the console carefully as if it were made of glass. Lisa stood up, collecting their trash from the meal. "I'll go back to our seats and get our things ready. Andre, you can come back when you're ready, but before the seatbelt sign comes on." As Lisa made her way back to their original seats, James turned to Andre. "That was very kind of you. Not many people would lend their favorite possession to someone they just met." Andre shrugged, watching as Tyler continued to play the game. "My mom always says that things are just things, but helping someone feel better lasts forever." James felt those words sink deep into his consciousness. How many things had he accumulated over the years? How many possessions that seemed important at the time of purchase but ultimately brought little lasting joy? Meanwhile, this boy with so few material possessions had just demonstrated a richness of spirit that money couldn't buy. As the plane began its gradual descent, the cabin crew making final preparations for landing, James found himself at a crossroads. In a short time they would land, collect their belongings, and go their separate ways. Andre and Lisa to their modest lives, James and Tyler to their privileged one. But something had changed during this flight. A connection had been formed. A lesson had been learned. and James knew with sudden clarity that he couldn't simply walk away and return to life as usual. As Tyler continued to play contentedly with the borrowed game, James made a decision. This chance encounter wouldn't end when the plane touched down. Somehow he would find a way to honor what had happened here, not just for Andre and Lisa, but for himself and Tyler as well. The plane descended through the clouds, the ground coming into view below. They were approaching their destination, but for James it felt more like the beginning of a journey than an end. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their final approach. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking that seatbelts were fastened and tray tables stowed. The plane banked gently to the left, giving passengers on the right side a spectacular view of the city below, its grid of streets and buildings gleaming in the afternoon sun. "We have to go back to our seats now," James told Tyler gently. "It's time to land." Tyler looked up from Andre's game console, his earlier distress forgotten in the joy of play. "But I'm not finished with my dinosaur palace." Andre smiled. "That's okay. The game saves your progress. You can give it back to me when we get off the plane, and everything you built will still be there." Tyler's face brightened. "Really? It won't disappear?" "Promise," Andre assured him. "Some things last even when you can't see them anymore." James was struck again by the simple wisdom in the boy's words. He helped Tyler gather his things, making sure the borrowed game console was safely tucked into his son's small backpack. "Thank you, Andre," James said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "For everything." Andre shrugged, that same humble smile playing at his lips. "It was fun. Tyler's a cool kid. Can Andre come visit us sometime, Daddy?" Tyler asked suddenly, his eyes bright with hope. "He could play in my room and I could show him all my toys." James hesitated, aware of the social complexity of such an invitation. He glanced at Andre, whose expression remained carefully neutral, then at Lisa a few rows back, who was watching them with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "That's a lovely idea, buddy," James said finally. "Let's talk about it after we land, okay?" Tyler nodded, satisfied with this answer, and took his father's hand as they made their way back to their first-class seats. Several passengers who had witnessed the earlier drama smiled at them as they passed, clearly relieved by the transformation in the previously inconsolable child. Back in first class, the contrast was stark. The seats were wider, the lighting softer, the service more attentive. A flight attendant immediately approached them. "Mr. Whitfield, we were wondering where you'd gone. Can I get you anything before landing?" James shook his head. "No, thank you. We're fine." As they settled back into their plush seats, Tyler looked around with new eyes. "Daddy, why are these seats bigger than Andre's?" The question caught James off guard. "How did you explain privilege to a 4-year-old? How did you explain that some people had more simply because they could afford it?" "Well," James began carefully, "these seats cost more money." Tyler frowned, processing this information. "But why don't Andre and his mom get the big seats too? Don't they want to be comfortable?" James felt a tightness in his chest. "I'm sure they do, buddy. But not everyone can afford the same things." "But that's not fair," Tyler declared with the straightforward moral clarity of childhood. "No," James agreed quietly. "Sometimes it isn't fair at all." The plane began its final descent, the subtle change in pressure making their ears pop. Tyler yawned, the excitement of the day finally catching up to him. He leaned against James's arm, his eyelids growing heavy. "I like Andre," he murmured sleepily. "He makes me feel brave." "Me too," James whispered, though his son was already drifting off to sleep. As the plane touched down with a gentle bump and the familiar sounds of the landing gear deploying, James found himself thinking about what would happen next. In a few minutes they would disembark. Tyler would return Andre's game console. There would be polite goodbyes, and then, what? They would go their separate ways. James to his luxury SUV waiting in the premium parking area, Lisa and Andre probably to public transportation, James would take Tyler to his parents' spacious home in an exclusive neighborhood, while Lisa and Andre would visit a grandmother who couldn't afford proper medical treatment. The thought sat uneasily in James's mind as the plane taxied to the critic. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, James gently woke Tyler. "Time to get up, buddy, we've landed." Tyler rubbed his eyes sleepily. "Are we going to say goodbye to Andre now?" "Yes, and you need to give him back his game, remember?" Tyler nodded, suddenly looking serious as he carefully removed the console from his backpack. "I was really careful with it, Daddy." "I know you were," James assured him, helping him gather their belongings. As first-class passengers, they were among the first to disembark. James hesitated at the door of the plane, looking back down the aisle. "Can we wait for Andre?" Tyler asked, clearly reading his father's thoughts. James nodded. "Let's wait in the jetway." They stood to the side as other passengers filed past. James noticed how many of them smiled at Tyler, the same people who had frowned in annoyance at his earlier crying. His son's transformation had somehow touched everyone who witnessed it. Finally, Lisa and Andre appeared, among the last to exit the plane. Andre's face lit up when he saw them waiting. "You're still here," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. Tyler rushed forward, carefully handing over the game console. "Thank you for letting me use it. I built a whole dinosaur kingdom." Andre took the device, checking it quickly before tucking it safely into his backpack. "You're welcome. Maybe someday you can show me what you built." Lisa stood slightly apart, keys jingling nervously in her hand. "Thank you again for being so kind to Tyler," she said to Andre, then to James. "We should be going. We need to catch the airport shuttle to the rental car place." James made a sudden decision. "Let me give you a ride." Lisa looked startled. "Oh, that's not necessary." "Please," James insisted. "It's the least I can do after Andre helped us so much." Lisa hesitated, clearly torn between practicality and pride. "Please, Mom," Andre asked quietly. "My legs are really tired." James suspected this was Andre's way of helping his mother accept the offer without losing face, and he felt a fresh wave of admiration for the boy's emotional intelligence. Lisa finally nodded. "Thank you. That would be helpful." As they walked through the terminal together, James noticed how Andre stayed close to Tyler, pointing out interesting things and keeping the younger boy engaged. Despite the significant age difference, they had formed a genuine bond during their time together. At the baggage claim, James collected his and Tyler's expensive matching luggage, while Lisa and Andre waited for a single worn suitcase they shared. The contrast between their possessions was just another visible marker of the vast difference in their circumstances. Outside, James led them to the premium parking area where his driver was waiting with a luxury SUV. "Robert, will be giving these folks a ride to their destination," James informed the driver, who nodded professionally and opened the doors for everyone. Tyler immediately climbed in and patted the seat next to him. "Sit here, Andre. Look, there's a TV and a fridge with sodas." Andre's eyes widened slightly at the vehicle's luxurious interior, but he maintained his composure as he settled next to Tyler. Lisa sat more stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the opulence surrounding her. "Where are you staying?" James asked as the car pulled away from the curb. "The Greenview Motel," Lisa answered. "It's about 20 minutes from the hospital where my mother is." James nodded, recognizing the name of a budget motel chain. "And how is your mother doing?" Lisa's expression tightened. "Not well. The doctors say..." She glanced at Andre and lowered her voice. "They've given her weeks, maybe a month. The cancer has spread too far for treatment to help now." James felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm very sorry to hear that." "We've been saving for this trip for over a year," Lisa continued quietly. "I wanted Andre to have a chance to say goodbye." In the back seat, the two boys were oblivious to this conversation, absorbed in examining the car's entertainment system. Tyler was showing Andre how to use the built-in tablet that controlled the TV, lights, and climate settings. "And after your visit?" James asked carefully. "What then?" Lisa sighed. "Back home, Back to work. Andre starts school again next week. He seems very bright, James observed. Does he do well academically? A flash of pride crossed Lisa's face. He's at the top of his class. His teachers say he has a gift for math and science. Has he had any opportunities to develop those interests outside of school? Lisa's expression fell slightly. Not really. Our district's budget for extracurricular programs keeps getting cut, and I can't afford private classes or camps. James nodded thoughtfully, an idea beginning to form in his mind. Before he could pursue it further, the car pulled up outside a modest motel. The contrast between the luxury vehicle and the surroundings couldn't have been more stark. "Thank you for the ride," Lisa said, reaching for the door handle. "It was very kind of you." "Wait," James said suddenly. "I'd like to talk to you about something. Would you and Andre join us for dinner tonight?" Lisa looked surprised and slightly suspicious. "That's not necessary. Please," James interrupted gently. "Tyler would love it, and I have a proposition I'd like to discuss with you." Lisa hesitated, her hand still on the door handle. "Please, Mom," Andre echoed his earlier plea. "Tyler said he wants to show me his dinosaur collection on his tablet." Lisa finally nodded. "All right, dinner would be nice." They exchanged contact information, and James promised to send the car for them at 6 o'clock. As Lisa and Andre collected their suitcase and walked toward the motel office, Tyler waved enthusiastically through the window. "Are they coming to Grandma and Grandpa's house?" Tyler asked as they drove away. "Not today, buddy," James replied, "but we'll see them again tonight." Later that evening, in a private dining room at one of the city's finest restaurants, the four of them sat around a table set with fine china and crystal. Tyler and Andre, both dressed in their best clothes, though the difference in quality was apparent, were engrossed in a game on James's tablet while the adults talked. "I'm still not clear on what you're proposing," Lisa said cautiously after James had spent several minutes explaining his idea. "It's simple," James replied. "I want to establish a foundation to support children's emotional well-being programs. What Andre did today, the way he connected with Tyler, the emotional intelligence he displayed, it was remarkable. I'd like to create something that can nurture those qualities in other children." Lisa nodded slowly. "That sounds worthwhile, but what does it have to do with us?" James took a deep breath. "I'd like Andre to be the first recipient of the Foundation's educational grant program, full funding for any educational opportunities he's interested in, summer camps, specialized programs, eventually college." Lisa's eyes widened. "That's extremely generous, and I'd like to offer you a job," James continued, "as the Foundation's first program director. Your background in early childhood education would be perfect." Lisa sat back, clearly stunned. "Mr. Whitfield, James, please." "James," she corrected herself. "This is overwhelming. We only met today. Why would you do this?" James glanced at the boys who were laughing together over something on the screen. "Because Andre showed me something important today. He showed me that my son needs more than just material advantages to be happy and resilient. And he made me realize that I've been measuring success all wrong." Lisa followed his gaze to the children. "Andre has always been special that way. Even when things have been tough, he finds ways to connect with people. That's a gift," James said seriously. "One worth nurturing, and one I'd like to help other children develop as well." They continued discussing the details as dinner was served. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate creation that made both boys' eyes widen with delight, the initial framework of the foundation had been established. But more importantly, a connection had been formed. A connection that transcended social barriers and economic differences. A connection that began with a crying child on an airplane and a kind-hearted boy who understood that sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer someone is not your possessions, but your presence. 2 weeks later, Andre stood beside his mother's hospital bed, holding her hand as she said her final goodbyes to her own mother. The elderly woman's face was thin and pale, but her eyes were bright with love as she looked at her grandson. "You be good for your mother," she whispered. "And remember what I always told you. A kind heart is worth more than a full wallet." Andre finished for her, tears streaming down his face. His grandmother smiled weakly. That's right. What she didn't know, what Lisa had decided to tell her only after they'd finalized all the details, was that Andre's future now held possibilities. That had seemed impossible just weeks before. The educational grant would ensure he received the best possible schooling. Lisa's new position with the foundation would provide financial stability they had never known. And perhaps most importantly, they had found friends in the most unexpected place. Outside the hospital room, James and Tyler waited quietly, having driven them to this difficult appointment. Tyler was subdued, understanding somehow that this was a sad day for his new friend. James had explained as gently as possible what it meant for Andre's grandmother to be so sick, and Tyler had insisted on bringing a small gift, a stuffed dinosaur, identical to his own favorite toy. When Andre finally emerged from the room, his face streaked with tears, Tyler stepped forward and silently handed him the dinosaur. No words were necessary as Andre accepted the gift, understanding it for what it was, a gesture of comfort from someone who had learned about comfort from Andre himself. As the four of them walked together down the hospital corridor, an unlikely group brought together by chance and transformed by compassion, James reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. A crying child on an airplane had led to a connection that crossed boundaries of class and privilege. A simple act of kindness had sparked the creation of a foundation that would go on to help thousands of children. And a wealthy man who had everything money could buy had been given a priceless gift by a boy who had very little. The reminder that true wealth lies not in possessions but in the capacity to reach out to others with an open heart. Sometimes, James thought as they stepped out into the sunshine together, the most profound changes begin in the most ordinary moments. And sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected teachers.